3 months after moving into an abandoned villa in the countryside, an 8-year-old autistic girl whispered, "She shouldn't be buried with me." Her mother thought it was just imagination, until her daughter drew a boy locked in darkness and a woman screaming behind a locked door. Behind the old bookshelf was a secret room containing skeletal remains, a piece of fabric embroidered with the name Jonah, and a blood-stained suicide note that was never sent. A forgotten child was finally heard, and the truth could no longer hide. The first autumn evening in this strange land, the wind carried the scent of decaying leaves and a chill that seeped through Amelia's sleeves. As soon as she stepped out of the car, she felt the difference in the atmosphere, thick and ancient, as if time here didn't flow, only decayed. Holloway Villa loomed before them like a frozen memory. The window panes were stained, the exterior paint peeling in flakes. Ivy clung to the walls like silent fingers grasping at the past. There were no birds, no scent of a warm kitchen, only cold and silence. Amelia opened the car door, stepping out first, then walking around to open the door for Elia. The girl didn't react. Elia's eyes were fixed on the house, silent, not afraid, but also not excited like normal children, simply observing so deeply that Amelia felt as if her daughter was hearing something she couldn't. "Honey, shall we go in?" Amelia said gently, reaching out her hand. Elia placed her hand in her mother's palm, her skin ice cold. Elia said nothing. She never said anything beyond a few scattered words. Though she was 8 years old, language was a labyrinthine world to Elia, too noisy, too incomprehensible. But Amelia was used to it. They didn't need many words, just hand in hand. The house inside was dusty, but the structure remained solid. The furniture was old-fashioned, neatly arranged as if the previous owners had just left yesterday. On the staircase was a tattered carpet with faint footprints leading to the second floor, where, for some reason, Elia insisted on going first. Amelia sighed, hurriedly pulling the suitcase into the house. She arranged her luggage while glancing around. Everything was quiet. Strangely so, not the gentle peace of the countryside, but the kind of quiet that made your ears automatically strain to listen, as if something was about to whisper. Reaching the second floor, Elia was already standing in the master bedroom, right in front of a bookshelf as large as the entire wall. She stood there, motionless, her eyes staring at the dusty rows of books. "Elia?" Amelia called softly. Elia didn't turn around. She reached out, touching the edge of the shelf lightly. Then, abruptly, she pulled her hand back as if burned. But instead of being scared, Elia whispered, "She's standing there." Amelia froze. It was a complete sentence, clear, from Elia's mouth. "What did you say, Elia?" She walked over quickly. Elia didn't answer. She just sat down on the floor, hugging her knees, her eyes still fixed on the bookshelf. The first night at the villa, Amelia couldn't sleep. Not because of any noise, but precisely because there wasn't any. No insects, no wind through the windows, no creaking of the wood, even though the old house was decades old. Beside the bed, Elia turned her face towards the bookshelf, even after her mother pulled her back. She didn't close her eyes. Her lips moved. Amelia gently pressed her ear to her daughter's chest. Her heart was still beating steadily, her breathing slow. But it was clear Elia was whispering something. "Are you dreaming?" she asked softly. "No," Elia replied. "She shouldn't be buried with me." Again, a complete sentence, as if from another mouth. Nothing in that sentence was of Elia's usual self. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. The next morning, the old neighbor came to knock on the door. Her name was Ruth, and she lived across the field. Silver hair, sharp eyes, hoarse voice. "I saw the new car, so I came to say hello," she said. then looked into the house, her eyes suddenly clouding over. "Do you know anything about this house?" "Only that it's been abandoned for quite a while. The Holloway family used to live here." Ruth was silent. Her lips pursed. After a moment, she said quietly, "When I was young, this house always made noises, especially at night. The sound of a child crying, footsteps on the attic, but nobody lived on the second floor." Amelia forced a smile. "Maybe it's just mice." She shook her head, her eyes not leaving Elia, who was sitting outside drawing on the porch. "Number mice don't know how to call Mommy," in a whisper. On the third night, Elia sat up again at 3 in the morning. She looked straight at the bookshelf, her mouth moving silently. Amelia walked over, sitting beside her daughter. She put her arm around Elia, but her daughter's hand was colder than usual. She was just staring at the wooden wall, as if someone was on the other side. "What are you looking at?" Amelia asked. A pause. Then Elia replied, softly like wind rustling through leaves. "He's hungry. But nobody brings water." Amelia suddenly found it hard to breathe. Something was living, or had lived, between those layers of decaying wood. On the 5th day, Elia started sitting in front of the bookshelf for hours, not moving, not drawing, not playing, not crying. She just sat. Every time Amelia called, Elia just said, "I'm listening." Amelia didn't understand, but she couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was growing in her heart. No longer doubt, but fear. Fear that this house wasn't just old, but was holding something back. A piece of memory that wasn't buried. A pain without words. And her daughter, somehow, was the only one hearing it. On the weekend, while cleaning out the old furniture in the house, Amelia found a yellowed photograph in a wooden desk drawer. In the photo was a man wearing a 70s-style suit, standing next to a small boy with an unfamiliar face. The child's eyes in the photo made Amelia shudder, because she had seen those eyes in Elia's drawings. She turned to look at her daughter. Elia was sitting on the windowsill, looking out at the forest. Sunlight illuminated her messy hair, but she didn't move. Amelia walked over. "Elia, do you want to tell Mommy something?" Elia didn't turn around. She just said softly, "She's still standing there, by the bookshelf. She doesn't want to leave until she finds him." The rain poured down on Monday morning, steadily and persistently, like the gentle tapping from a distant world. On the old roof, rainwater dripped through the misaligned tiles. Inside the house, the air was heavier than usual. Elia sat in the middle of the bedroom, the old wooden floor mottled with pale grey light from the window. In front of her was a stack of white paper, a few dull wax crayons. She was still silent, her head slightly tilted, her eyes focused, as if listening to a piece of music that adults couldn't hear. Amelia, leaning against the door, looked at her daughter with a feeling she couldn't name. Elia was drawing. That was normal. But the expression on her face was no longer innocent concentration. It was the expression of someone remembering something very painful. She approached, gently kneeling beside her daughter. "Elia, what are you drawing?" Elia didn't answer. Her hand was still moving, each stroke decisive and cold. Amelia glanced down. A child, his hands tied, sat curled up in the darkness. Beside him was a woman with curly hair, her mouth wide open as if screaming. The woman's eyes were full of anger, but also overflowing with despair. Amelia was stunned. This wasn't a child's drawing. This was a memory, or a nightmare someone had experienced. "Elia, who taught you to draw this?" She tried to keep her voice even. This time Elia stopped, looked at her mother, and then said softly, "Nobody taught me. I just draw what I see." Amelia hugged the sketchbook, sitting alone in the kitchen. In front of her were 3 cups of tea. 2 were cold, 1 untouched. Her hands trembled as she leafed through each page. Not just one picture. There were more. A series of repeated images, a small room with no windows, a worn wooden bed, a blanket embroidered with the letter J in light blue, and always 2 figures, the child and the curly-haired woman. They were separated. They cried. They longed to touch each other, but were always blocked by invisible walls. Amelia felt her chest tighten. Not fear, but pity. There was a pain passing through Elia's strokes. Something not imaginary. Couldn't be imaginary. The next morning, Amelia carefully put a few pictures in her bag, then went to see the child psychologist who had followed Elia when she lived in the city. Dr. Reynolds was an elderly man, calm and thorough. After looking at the pictures for a long time, he rested his hand on his chin, frowning. "Are you sure nobody has told Elia any ghost stories or stories about death?" he asked. "Nobody. She can't even watch a short cartoon without dialogue all the way through," Amelia replied, honestly. Then he paused for a moment. "I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in things that humans can't yet explain. This isn't fabrication. For people with autism, the brain has the ability to sense emotional wavelengths that ordinary people can't reach." Amelia looked at him expectantly, her heart pounding. He continued, "This could be a form of parasitic memory. That is, an individual, particularly sensitive, can empathize with and recreate emotions, memories never experienced, if placed in a space that bears too strong an emotional imprint." "You mean these drawings are from someone else? Not from Elia?" she whispered. "Not exactly from anyone, but it could be the emotions of someone who lived, who died in that place. And now, your daughter is hearing them." Amelia clenched her hands. She didn't know whether to feel pain or gratitude that her daughter could feel the pain of others, even if the price was the peace of her mind. That afternoon, Amelia returned home, her mind reeling. She carefully hid the stack of drawings in a drawer, not wanting Elia to see that her mother was scared. But that evening, while cooking, she heard a small whisper. "She shouts, 'Don't lock the door! Don't lock the door!'" Amelia turned her head. Elia was sitting on the threshold in the hallway, her eyes wide, her hands hugging her knees, still repeating that sentence. "Honey, who is shouting?" She sat down beside her. "She screams, but nobody hears. They locked the door. She just wants to hug him. One last time." Amelia choked. She hugged her daughter tightly, feeling a wave of cold rising from Elia's skin, spreading to her heart. After putting Elia to sleep, Amelia returned to her daughter's bedroom. She reopened the sketchbook. A new drawing was placed on top of the stack. This time, in the drawing, the boy wasn't tied up. He lay still on the floor, his eyes closed, his hand on his chest. Next to him was a thin blanket embroidered with the letter J that was torn at the edges. Under the picture, in Elia's scrawling handwriting, was a line. "His name is Jonah." Amelia didn't know why she was crying. Perhaps it was because of Jonah's eyes in the picture. No resentment, no anger, just a loneliness that nobody should feel in their early years. She whispered softly, "Jonah, who are you? And what happened to you?" Behind her, in the mirror blurred by moisture, the reflection of the bookshelf seemed to blur, as if a shadow person was standing among the old books, waiting to be found. The clock struck 3 in the morning. The old house was still shrouded in the thick night. The sparse drizzle had stopped, but the air still smelled heavily of mildew, as if the walls, the floor, and even the wooden ceiling were breathing out the gloom of years of being forgotten. Amelia woke up with a start. No noise, no call, but she felt that something was wrong. A very small change in the silence, like when you discover you're not alone in the room, even if nobody speaks. She stepped barefoot out of bed, opening her bedroom door slightly, looking towards the hallway. The nightlight in the hallway was still on. And Elia was no longer in bed. Her mind immediately went into alert mode. Not because she was afraid Elia was in danger. This house had no balconies, no sharp objects, but because Amelia was too familiar with the silent signs of her daughter. Elia only left her bed at night when something was calling her. Amelia walked lightly to Elia's bedroom door, opened it slightly, and held her breath. Her daughter was standing facing the bookshelf, motionless. Elia's right hand was touching the wooden surface lightly, exactly the point between two bookshelves, as if that place was a gateway to another world. Amelia didn't dare to call. She just watched. The girl ran her fingertips lightly over the wood, then stopped. Her left hand gently pressed against the surface, while her right hand began to caress a small, seemingly recessed area. The wind whistled softly through the slightly ajar window. In the blink of an eye, an old book fell from the shelf to the ground. The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed in the space like an explosion. Elia didn't turn around. Amelia was stunned. Behind where the book had just fallen, she saw a small crack in the wooden wall. The crack had a gentle arc shape, almost completely covered by dust and books that hadn't been touched for a long time. If it weren't for the nightlight casting a sideways glow, she certainly wouldn't have noticed. Elia slowly sat down on the floor, her back still turned to her mother. She placed her hand on the crack. Her small fingers trembled slightly, and then she whispered. The voice was no longer Elia's. It was thicker, hoarser, as if choked by years of not being able to speak. He locks the door. Amelia felt her heart tighten. The air around her was colder. He doesn't want anyone to call him father. Amelia walked in, slowly, gently, as if afraid of breaking a dream or awakening a nightmare. Elia, she whispered, her voice trembling. Elia blinked. She turned around, her eyes seeming both strange and familiar. That look wasn't the look of a child playing. It was like the look of someone reliving a memory stuck deep in a body that didn't belong to them. Amelia knelt down, hugging her daughter. Elia leaned against her mother's chest, but her eyes didn't leave the bookshelf. The next morning, Amelia woke up early. She couldn't shake the image of the night before. She decided to examine the bookshelf more closely. It was a large wooden shelf, nearly touching the ceiling, stretching across both walls. Behind the shelf was a yellowed wooden wall, thick and solid. Below was a floor that seemed to sag slightly, a sign that there might be a hollow or hidden passageway underneath. She pulled out a few books, using a flashlight to shine into the crack. Something was different. A small panel with a faint outline, like a door that had been closed and painted over many times. Amelia stepped back, biting her lip. Then she decided to try pulling the bookshelf. It didn't budge. She used more force. The shelf still stood still, as if something inside was clinging to it, or refusing to be moved. She took a flashlight, crouched down close to the floor, using the end of the light to tap on the parts of the wall. At the middle part, the echo was emptier. Clearly there was space behind it. Amelia stood up. Her hands were covered in dust and cobwebs, her palms sore from hitting old rusty wood nails. She looked at the entire bookshelf again, then turned to look at her daughter, who was sitting drawing by the window. Elia, do you know anything about this shelf? Elia didn't raise her head. She just said, he's in there. He cries a lot. But after that, there's no sound anymore. That night, Amelia didn't sleep. She sat beside Elia's bed, quietly listening to every breath of her daughter. Part of her still hoped that it was just a manifestation of a language disorder, a reaction of an overactive imagination in an autistic child. But the other part, deeper, more instinctive, was warning her that things weren't that simple. At exactly 3:15, Elia opened her eyes, not panicked, not dreamy. She sat up, looking at her mother. "He doesn't want anyone to know. He says if he calls him father, he'll starve to death." Amelia couldn't breathe for a moment. She held Elia's hand tightly. "Honey, who is saying that to you?" Elia was silent, but her eyes looked towards the bookshelf, and for the first time, Amelia understood that behind the decaying wood, there wasn't just a room, but maybe a death that was forgotten, a call that was snuffed out, and a child that nobody ever held one last time. The rare sunlight streamed through the thick clouds, falling on the long, dusty hallway. The house seemed more imposing during the day, like a wild beast temporarily sleeping, hiding its fangs under layers of old paint and decaying wood. Amelia stood in front of the second-floor bookshelf, her eyes fixed. After 3 consecutive nights of Elia dreaming and saying inexplicable words, she no longer had any doubts. Something was hidden behind this place, and it was trying to be heard. She couldn't move the large, heavy bookshelf alone, so she decided to call an acquaintance. Mr. Davis, an old carpenter who used to repair houses in the area. When he arrived, he frowned as soon as he stepped into the house. "It's been a long time since I've been in a place that smells this old." Amelia just nodded slightly. They began to unscrew each screw at the base of the shelf. The rusty screws creaked, a few of them not coming out no matter what. Davis had to use pliers, his hands trembling with age. "Are you sure you want to take this down? It looks like it was nailed in a way to hide something," he said, half jokingly. "I need to know," Amelia replied, without smiling. After nearly an hour, the bookshelf was finally moved away from the wall. A thick layer of dust was stirred up, flying everywhere. Amelia coughed, her eyes stinging, but she still moved forward. Behind it was a dark wooden wall. On it, a small door appeared, only as tall as an adult's waist, enough for a child to crawl through. Amelia knelt down, blowing hard to clear away the dust. Her hand touched the door latch, rusty iron, rotten. She tried to turn it, and it broke cleanly in her hand. A foul, musty smell immediately wafted out, thick like a soul trapped for too long. Davis stepped back. "This place? I don't think you should open it." "Thank you, I can handle it myself," Amelia whispered. Inside was a tiny room, low-ceilinged, with no windows. The space was pitch black, the light from outside only enough to see the peeling walls, the wooden floor eaten through by termites. Amelia walked in, each step light as if afraid of touching something she shouldn't touch. Then she stopped. In the middle of the floor, curled up, was a small skeleton, clearly that of a child. No clothes, no shoes. Next to it was an old blanket, tattered but still with a few embroidered stitches, a swirling blue jay, mixed with frayed fabric and mold. Amelia's heart stopped beating. She knelt down, her hands covering her face. There was no crying, only tears flowing from deep within her chest, the feeling like she had just touched the remains of a story that had never been told. Not far from where the skeleton lay, a piece of paper was clipped under an overturned brick. She carefully lifted it out. The piece of paper was almost rotten, but a few streaks of dried blood were still faintly visible. If anyone reads this, please don't let them call me illegitimate. I have a father, and my father killed me. Amelia jumped up, staggering as if slapped from another realm. She didn't know how many times she breathed in that moment. The world seemed to turn upside down. She stood there, in the small room that had once been the living space, or rather, the dying space, of a child. A cold hand pressed against her hand. Amelia turned around with a start. Elia. She had been standing right behind her mother since who knows when, without a sound. Her eyes were not afraid, only calm, and very sad. Elia, how did you get in here? Elia squeezed her mother's hand lightly, saying softly, she didn't get to hug him. The small sentence was like a sob, but it cut a deep line into her heart. Amelia felt her knees weaken. She sat down, hugging her daughter, letting tears fall again, this time not out of fear, but because of pain to the bone marrow. All afternoon, Amelia didn't say anything. She cleaned the room slowly, carefully placing the piece of paper, the blanket, and the remaining bones into a wooden box, covering it lightly as if afraid of hurting the small soul that once lived there. Elia sat drawing right outside the door of the room. This time, she drew a hug. A woman with curly hair, tears streaming down her face, hugging a small boy tightly. Around them was warm yellow, the only thing not dark in the series of paintings Elia had ever drawn. Amelia saw the picture. She didn't ask, just sat down, placing her hand on her daughter's head. "We'll find a way for her to hug him again," she whispered. "I promise." And for the first time, Elia nodded. That evening, Amelia didn't get a wink of sleep. Questions kept running around in her head like bees that had lost their hive. Who was the father in the piece of paper? Why did he kill his child? Why did he lock the boy in a sealed room for days, months, until he starved to death? And what made her the angriest? Why didn't anyone know? Why hadn't anyone said anything for so many years, when people can abandon a child to die slowly in silence, then build a bookshelf to hide it? That's no longer indifference. That's a crime. Amelia clenched her fist. She looked at her daughter sleeping, Elia's face strangely peaceful. As if in the pain, she had seen something that Amelia hadn't yet understood. From the day the secret room was discovered, Elia no longer drew. She wasn't scared, wasn't in pain, just quieter. Every afternoon, when the sunlight gradually receded from the porch and the shadows of the trees began to lengthen on the ground, Elia went to the back garden. Nobody told her, nobody taught her, but she still went. Each small step, her feet not touching the ground as if afraid of waking something sleeping beneath. Amelia initially thought it was just a manifestation of post-traumatic stress, but by the third day, when Elia was still going in the same direction, always towards the forest, she began to feel that something was leading her daughter. That afternoon, Amelia decided to follow. Not calling, not stopping, just silently falling back a few steps, letting those small feet lead the way. As if Elia was the only one who knew what she was looking for. The path into the forest had no trail. The grass grew high to the knees, the bushes dense. Elia still slipped through easily, as if she had known it for a long time. Amelia had to push aside branches, push aside bushes, her heart beating fast, unsure if it was from urgency or from something growing in her heart. Until they passed a low mound of earth. They stopped. Before them was a round clearing, covered by tree roots and weeds. Looking closer, Amelia realized it was a well. Old. Filled in. The bricks had collapsed. There was no clear wellhead, just a deep black hole like a one-eyed monster, still watching the world with buried resentment. Elia stood still, her eyes directed downwards. She knelt down, placing her hand on the soft grass, and then, in a voice as light as the wind, "She's here." Amelia didn't need to ask who she was. She already knew. 3 days later, the excavation permit was approved. Amelia had to work with the police, presenting everything that had happened, the suicide note, the secret room, the skeletal remains. Thanks to the intervention of Dr. Reynolds and Elia's medical records, the authorities agreed to open the well to investigate the crime. The excavation took place quietly. No noise, no press. Just two investigators, a forensic specialist, and Amelia, standing beside Elia, hand in hand. When the grass was cleared, each stone was turned over. A fishy smell shot straight into her nose. The smell of earth mixed with sweat, blood, and human bones. The smell of a crime that had been buried with silence. Before the third layer of soil, they found an adult skeleton. The skull was broken, the ribs shattered. The hands were tied with rotten rope. Only twisted fragments remained, like dead snakeskin. A hairpin fell out. A white chrysanthemum made of brass, old, but still intact. The forensic scientist bent down, quietly collecting each piece, without a word of comment. But Amelia clearly heard a faint sigh, like a belated farewell from the living to someone who had lain too long beneath the cold ground. She looked around. The forest was empty. Nobody from the village came. No flowers. No farewell. Perhaps the most painful thing wasn't the death, but the death that nobody acknowledged. Elia squeezed her mother's hand, then gently walked to the mouth of the well, a grave without a headstone, without a name. From her pocket, Elia took out a white chrysanthemum. Nobody knew when she had picked it, and placed it on the cold brick edge. She took out a second object from her pocket, the embroidered J cloth, which she had quietly kept from the secret room. Without a word, she placed it next to the flower, like a string connecting the two souls of a mother and child who had once been separated. Amelia saw everything without saying a word, because that silent act was already the answer. Elia stood silently for a long time, then whispered softly, "Now." She's not lost anymore. That sentence cut through all the defenses in Amelia. She knelt down, her hands covering her face, letting tears flow like a flood. Not because of fear, but because of the pity accumulated through each clue, now bursting into truth. As a mother, she understood what it was like to lose a child, but to be a mother killed before being able to hold her child one last time. Amelia couldn't imagine how great that pain was. She only knew, if Miriam had ever shouted, this world had covered its ears. That night, the house was unusually quiet, but no longer the heavy silence as before, but a sad peace, like after a funeral. Elia sat by the window, silently sticking another chrysanthemum into the old ceramic vase. She looked at it for a long time, not sad, not scared, just as still as the surface of a lake after the rain. Amelia approached, sitting down beside her. "Elia, can you hear anything from her anymore?" she asked softly. Elia shook her head. "Number. She's not crying anymore. I think we've found her. And her son too." Amelia took her daughter's hand. Elia nodded slightly. She smiled, a fragile but heart-wrenchingly real smile. Now, they're going together. These days, it rained steadily, as if the sky was also washing something away. The trees were soaked. People's hearts were heavy. Amelia looked through the car window, where each raindrop slid down like a streak of tears. Elia sat quietly in the back seat, holding an old drawing of Jonah and Miriam. She didn't speak, and didn't need to. Amelia understood. Miriam had been found. Jonah had been freed. But that still wasn't enough. They still hadn't been called by their rightful names. The town library sat quietly on the corner of the old street, opposite a bakery that had been closed for many years. The whitewashed walls were yellowing. The plastic flower pots hanging in front of the windows were faded. But inside, the smell of old paper and varnished pine wood was still intact, as if time had been trapped in each filing cabinet. Amelia walked in, holding the bag of documents. She went to the front desk, where an old silver-haired woman was arranging books. "Excuse me, I want to look up records about the Holloway family, from the 70s. Amelia's voice was even, but slightly hoarse. She hadn't slept enough. The old woman looked up. Her glasses slipped down her nose, but the eyes inside were still sharp. "Holloway." Her voice couldn't hide the surprise. "I thought she ran away." "She," Amelia pressed. "Miriam," she replied, "the only black maid who ever lived in that villa. Decades ago, the whole town was buzzing. Then suddenly, it fell silent. The papers said she left voluntarily with her illegitimate child." Amelia clenched the strap of her bag tightly. "I don't think that's what really happened." The old woman led her down to the basement archive, a cold and dark room, the weak light shining through the fluorescent light hanging precariously. Wooden filing cabinets were arranged in long rows, each cabinet labeled by year. "There's a batch of paper that hasn't been digitized," she said, her hand shaking as she opened the old lock. "Nobody's touched this pile in almost 30 years. But I remember there was a brown file. Very strange. It said Holloway, but not completely." Amelia bent down, searching each file one by one. Her hand turned through the dust, each yellowed sheet of paper rustling like the whispers of the past. Her hand suddenly stopped. A file of paper clipped carelessly with old parachute cord, the spine covered in canvas fabric, so frayed that the edges of the paper were peeling. Outside were just 3 handwritten letters in smeared ink. J. Holloway. No date. No address. No clear handwriting. But Amelia knew. This was what she needed to find. Her heart pounding, Amelia opened it and saw a birth certificate. The ink had smeared, but it could still be read. Name, Jonah Holloway. Date of birth, September 8th, 1970. Father, Arthur Holloway, not officially recognized. Mother, Miriam Ainsley. At the bottom was a handwritten note, trembling, not to be released to the public at the request of the Holloway family. Amelia held her breath. Her hand trembled slightly. Jonah bore the Holloway surname. Not an anonymous child, not illegitimate. He was the blood of the very person who locked him to death. Behind the file was a stack of folded papers, personal information change records, submitted in 1972. The declaration was made by Edward Holloway, Arthur's eldest son. In it, he stated that Miriam Ainsley left her position as a maid on the night of November 12, 1971, taking with her a child that was not registered for birth. No legal rights. Request to destroy the original record. Amelia was speechless with anger. Fake papers, but signed and sealed at a time when nobody checked. And then, everything was buried under the guise of servants' affairs. Just a few signatures, a few seals, were enough to erase 2 lives. Amelia suddenly understood. This wasn't just a death. This was an erasure. She sat down in a chair, her eyes looking at the pages like seeing blood clotting in each line of ink. Each letter was a suppressed cry. Each line was a scream ignored. Around her was the stifling air of dust, mildew, and the past. But inside, in the chest tightened with each beat, was a fire burning. No more fear, no more doubt, just determination. Nobody has the right to erase a child's name from history. That evening, when she got home, Amelia spread all the records on the table. Elia approached, her eyes staring at the name Jonah Holloway. "I'm going to take these papers to court," Amelia said. "You think that's right, don't you?" Elia nodded. Then she placed her hand on the blurred line. Son of Arthur Holloway, as if to confirm with the soul that was quietly listening. "He's been called by the right name," Elia whispered. Amelia squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. With each touch to the record, she felt she was lifting a soul, and the accompanying responsibility couldn't be lighter than a hug. 3 days later, Amelia was at the town lawyer's office, where old civil records were handled. She submitted the documents, attaching a request to reinvestigate the disappearance of Miriam Ainsley and Jonah Holloway, with forensic evidence from the room and the deep well. The receptionist stared at Amelia. "Are you sure you want to stir this up?" "Nobody should die twice," she replied. "Once in the flesh and once in the records." News leaked from the records room didn't take long to spread throughout the town. Although the authorities hadn't officially announced their conclusions, the fact that a child's skeleton was found in the Holloway villa, along with an old birth certificate proving that Jonah was Arthur Holloway's illegitimate son, was enough to ignite a smouldering spark in people's hearts. A spark that, for decades, everyone had pretended not to see. On the 4th day after Amelia filed the records with the court, she went to the market to buy some vegetables. The atmosphere there was different. Hurried conversations died down as she approached. A few eyes avoided her. Others looked at her as if looking into the hole of a wall that had just been broken down, where the truth poured out, smudged and grating. Amelia wasn't angry. She understood. Silence, when it has lasted too long, becomes a default setting. People don't speak because they don't know where to start, or worse, because they fear that once they have spoken, there will be no turning back. That evening, when Elia was asleep, Amelia opened the door and sat on the porch. The space was quiet, only the sound of insects and wind blowing through the bare branches. A white envelope was placed in front of her door. Nobody knocked. There was no sender's name. Inside was a handwritten letter in pale purple ink, the handwriting old, shaky, but still clear. "I used to work for the Holloway family in 1971. I was the last person to see Miriam alive. She cried a lot that day. I heard an argument in the study, and after that, nobody mentioned her again. A week later, I was fired. I have carried the silence for 49 years. If you need me to testify, leave a letter under the post office. Signed, J.M." Amelia folded the letter. No tears. Just the feeling that a gate had just opened. Late, but not too late. 3 days later, another letter arrived. Longer. This was no longer an affirmation, but a confession, or rather, a living record of a buried crime. "My name is Jeanette. I used to be a maid in the Holloway villa from 1968 to the end of 1971. I don't forget a single detail of that night, even though decades have passed. But I don't have enough courage to tell it. Miriam was the gentlest girl I had ever met. Just 19 years old, newly orphaned, brought in by the old housekeeper. She hardly ever spoke, just worked and often sang to herself. I knew things between her and Mr. Arthur weren't right. Once I saw him pull her hand into the study, closing the door. That time, Miriam came out with red eyes, her lips bleeding, but nobody dared to ask. 9 months later, Jonah was born. Nobody said anything, but everyone knew. The boy had Mr. Arthur's eyes and Miriam's curly hair. Mr. Arthur initially ignored it, but when the little guy babbled "Daddy" in front of guests, I knew something had happened. That night, Mr. Arthur invited 2 strange men to the house. I was told to go down to the kitchen, not to come up, but I heard the screaming. Miriam screamed, "Don't! Please let me hold him one last time." Then there was silence. Silence, as if someone had just snuffed out a flame. The next morning, Miriam was gone. Jonah also disappeared. Mr. Arthur said Miriam stole something and ran away, but I saw blood on the doorknob of the laundry room. Nobody investigated. 2 weeks later, the second-floor bookshelf was replaced. Nobody asked why that room had been locked all along. I quit my job because I knew if I stayed, I would have to be silent forever. I've been silent until now. I'm sorry." Amelia finished reading, her hand trembling with anger. Elia sat beside her, quietly looking at her mother. She didn't need to ask, but Amelia still whispered, "You're right. He didn't let her hold him one last time." They sat together under the dim yellow light. Neither knew that, the next morning, the seventh white chrysanthemum would appear by the well, this time accompanied by a piece of paper with a short line. "We know, and we can't be silent anymore." An old man named Lawrence, the owner of the old grocery store, when he met Amelia, only said one sentence. "At that time, I heard knocking from the forest, but I didn't go out." Then he pulled out an old hairpin from his pocket, not made of brass, just white plastic, and placed it in her hand. "I found this next to the trash pile behind my house a few days after Miriam disappeared. I don't understand why I didn't say anything." Amelia clenched her hand, unable to say anything. No blame, no forgiveness, just simply accepting. Because she knew sin isn't redeemed by words, but by actions afterwards. A week later, the court officially issued a decision to seal the Holloway villa. Each room was photographed, each bone, each piece of paper, each old book was taken for examination. The villa was fenced off. The name Holloway was removed from the signpost leading to the property. The family crest carved on the iron gate was covered with white tarpaulin. No one told the stories anymore about Mr. Arthur giving the town its first printing press, or the Holloway family being the founders of the local charity. Everything was silent, silent to make way for the truth. Amelia walked out of the courthouse with a letter certifying that Jonah Holloway, son of Miriam Ainsley, was restored to his rightful status. No longer a child of unknown father, no longer a name erased from the records. She stood in front of the gate of the villa, which was now just a shell of a decaying, glorious past, and turned to Elia. She was holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums wrapped in newspaper, carrying them to the edge of the forest. "Today, I'm not going with you," Amelia said. Elia said nothing, just nodded. On the damp earth by the well, Elia sat alone, arranging each white chrysanthemum into a circle. The wind blew through, gently shaking her messy hair. She bowed her head slightly, not crying, not speaking, just listening, because sometimes apologies don't need to be spoken out loud. They echo in the silence, when a community bows its head and realizes they have stood too long beside a locked door without daring to open it. That night, it rained again. Not violently, not angrily, but steadily, silently, like applause for a ceremony that nobody dared to preside over. Outside, the wind whistled softly through the bare branches, blowing on the window panes the mournful song of old winters. Inside, Elia lay on the bed, her forehead burning, her body curled up like a leaf blown by the wind. Amelia discovered her daughter's fever when her hand touched her cheek. Elia's whole body was like a smouldering fire burning from within. The fever didn't come suddenly. It rose gradually, layer by layer, like a black river slowly flowing through the heart and lungs, not sweeping away the blood, but sweeping away each breath. "Honey, Elia." Amelia shook her gently, but Elia didn't wake up. Her little eyes were closed, her lips cracked, and that small body began to tremble lightly in waves. Without waiting, Amelia quickly wrapped her daughter in a blanket, called the doctor, but her voice also began to choke. Not because of panic, but because of a premonition, deep, very deep, that this wasn't just a fever, but a final dialogue. Midnight. The phone still hadn't answered. The signal was erratic because a big storm was coming. Amelia sat beside Elia's bed, her hand not leaving her forehead. She used a cold towel to apply it lightly, her other hand holding Elia's small hand, rubbing it while praying silently. And then Elia began to speak, without opening her eyes, without waking up. But each word fell out, clear as if messaged from somewhere else. "Jonah, don't cry anymore. Don't tremble. She's coming. Your mother has returned." Amelia stopped. Tears welled up. "Go home with your mother, Jonah." Each word Elia said was like tearing a layer of air in the room. No one had called Jonah's name since the grave was erected. No one told Elia what happened, but in her delirium, she knew clearly, as if she were witnessing it. Amelia pulled out a soft woolen blanket, covered her again, then took the tiny hand that was now getting colder. In her heart, an unnamed fear welled up. Fear of losing her child. Fear that after all, Elia wouldn't come back. Please let her be at peace," she said softly, almost whispering to the room. "Bring her back. She's not a soul keeper. She's just a child." For the first time in many years, Amelia knelt down, not to pray, but to let go, letting go of the pride of adults, of reason, of science. She bowed her head by the bed, repeating 3 words like a vow. "Give me back my child." The wind outside blew harder. A room door quietly opened even though it was locked. Light from the hallway poured in, like a white blur spanning 2 worlds. Elia smiled in her dream. She's holding him. They're gone. And she's sorry for me. Amelia squeezed her daughter tighter. She didn't know how long she had cried. The room seemed to stop breathing. Only the sound of heartbeats, the sound of rain, and the sound of Elia whispering in her dream. "He wanted to thank you, but he didn't know how, Mom." For a moment, Amelia felt as if she heard 2 footsteps running past the hallway. Light, very light, like the footsteps of a child walking in the fog. Then they faded away. Not because they disappeared, but because they had reached where they needed to be. Then Elia was silent. The fever began to subside like the tide. Her breathing became more even. Her skin was no longer burning like fire. The small body began to relax. Like a string that had been stretched taut for the past few days, was finally released. And then, at the moment that Amelia didn't expect, nor dare to hope for, Elia opened her eyes. Her dark brown eyes looked at her mother. Not afraid, not surprised. Just stillness, as if every storm had passed in her sleep. Amelia bent down, touching her forehead to her daughter's forehead. "Elia," she whispered. The girl looked deeply into her mother's eyes, then opened her mouth, and for the first time, clearly, completely, she uttered one word. "Mom." Amelia burst into tears, not the cry of despair, but the bursting, after a journey too long, too much silence, now rewarded with a tiny sound, but strong enough to collapse every wall in her heart. Her daughter had called, not with the soul of someone else, not in a dream, but with her own voice, a mom that seemed nothing special, but to Amelia it was the bell of salvation, the first beat of a real future. The next day, the sun shone. Elia was able to sit up, drink water, eat porridge, and when Amelia asked, "What did you dream about?" she just shook her head, then said, softly, "I didn't dream. I just saw the last thing he needed." Amelia stroked her daughter's hair, not asking any more. There are things that don't need to be explained with logic. There are things that should only be kept in the heart, like a promise that has been fully fulfilled. That afternoon, Elia went to the porch, drawing the first picture she had ever drawn, the child in the darkness. But this time, the boy wasn't tied up, no longer crying, but holding the hand of a curly-haired woman, walking together under rows of white chrysanthemums. In the corner of the picture, for the first time, Elia wrote her own name. Elia Holloway, the one who listened. A year after the Holloway villa was sealed, the ancient iron gate was opened again. Not for a noble family to return, but to start something completely new. On the old brick floor, under the time-worn tiles, they didn't rebuild the house according to the old model. They kept the crack in the hallway wall to remember. They kept the wooden staircase where Elia had stood in the middle of the night and said words that nobody understood. But this time, those paths led to a completely different place. A memorial library located in the heart of the old villa named the Jonah and Miriam Foundation, a place to preserve forgotten voices. On the day of the inauguration, the sun shone gently. The wind blew from the forest behind, no longer cold. Amelia stood on the edge of the yard, hand in hand with Elia, as people removed the tarpaulin covering the shiny brass nameplate. The plaque simply engraved the line, "If anyone reads this, memories are not meant to be buried, but to be shared." Inside, the large reading room was repaved with new floors, but still retaining the old window frames. There, a bookshelf was built from young pine wood, as high as a child's head, engraved with the names Jonah Holloway and Miriam Ainsley, two people who were once not heard. The opposite corner was the place to hang Elia's first paintings, from dark strokes, full of shadows and ropes, to the later ones, a curly-haired woman hugging a baby in a field of white chrysanthemums. There were no captions, just a short line. These are what Elia heard, and what we need to learn, to listen to. Each week, under that painting, the manager would take turns placing a new piece of paper left by the children who came to the library. Scrawled words, but full of sincerity. I used to think I deserved to be silent. The teacher said I said, "No one understands," but Elia understands. I want to tell Dad, I'm not wrong. Amelia read each line, keeping all of them, pressing them into a hardcover book entitled Things That Were Never Said. She believed that each line was the small echo that helped keep a part of humanity in a noisy world that so often plays deaf. Elia sat in the corner of the reading room. In front of her were 5 children from 4 to 8 years old. The children sat cross-legged on the carpet, holding coloring books, waiting for her to read. Amelia watched that scene from afar, her throat choking up. Elia, the child who couldn't say a sentence for the first 8 years of her life, was now holding a picture book, her voice clear but slow, reading to each child. Every time she hesitated, the children didn't urge her, they waited. And Elia, no longer afraid of being interrupted, just kept going. Once, a brown-skinned boy asked, "Sister Elia, you used to not talk at all, right?" Elia nodded, smiling. "I was afraid people wouldn't believe me." "Are you not scared now?" Elia thought for a moment, then replied, "Because now I know. I don't need to speak loudly. I just need to speak to the right person." At the end of the reading that day, she pulled from the shelf an old file that had been laminated. It was a copy of the suicide note from years ago, restored for display. Elia sat down, opened the first page, her hand trembling slightly. Then, in the lightest voice Amelia had ever heard, but the clearest that everyone had ever felt, Elia read, "If anyone reads this." In the hall, an autistic boy named Leo stood up, walking towards the picture. He was holding a plastic hair clip broken in half, dropped by his mother during the last time they argued. He couldn't speak, but placed the item on the table, then turned back, drawing a picture of a child hugging himself. Elia didn't ask, just looked and nodded. The following month, the Jonah and Miriam Foundation started the Listen to Heal program. They invited children from orphanages, disability centers, and special schools to come each week, not to learn how to pronounce, but to be believed that their voices had value. A corner of the room was designed specifically, the memory corner, where children could draw what they couldn't say. Elia was in charge of that corner. She didn't lecture, just sat beside them, coloring with the children. And sometimes, when a child trembled holding a pen, Elia placed her hand on his and said, "I used to be scared too." But someone heard. The day Elia hung up the new picture, a child sitting by the light, she turned to ask her mother, "Mum, if I had never heard Jonah, would I ever know that I also have a voice?" Amelia didn't answer immediately. She walked over, hugging her tightly, then replied, "Maybe you are the voice that Jonah and Miriam left for this world." Amelia often stood silently at the door, watching everything. Sometimes an old woman came, placing a white chrysanthemum by the windowsill. Sometimes it was an old man on crutches, leaving a piece of paper with a few lines of remorse from the 70s. Each small action was a slice of memory returning, not to complain, but to be looked at for the first time in the light. The room where Jonah had starved to death behind the bookshelf was now a silent cartoon screening room, where autistic children sat next to each other, not being urged to speak, not being criticized for being silent. The well in the forest was not filled, but turned into a memorial, surrounded by white chrysanthemums. On the small stone pedestal was a carved line. No one should die in silence. No one should live without being heard. One spring day, Elia led a small group of students into the library. She pointed to her oldest picture, the drawing of Jonah tied up. A curly-haired girl asked, "Was he very scared, sister?" Elia replied, "Yeah, but now he's not scared anymore." She turned back, her eyes meeting Amelia standing at the door, then smiled, the smile of a child who was once lost, now called by the right name. The forest wind of March blew lightly, not cold, not wet, just enough to shake the green grass growing around the edge of the old well, where now a small white headstone was placed next to it. Not luxurious, not elaborate, just a round piece of stone, the edges slightly rippled like flower petals, with deeply carved letters, Jonah Holloway, 1970 to 1975, son of Miriam Ainsley. Not a forgotten child. Below that line was another sentence, smaller but not dimmer. No one should die in silence. That day was the memorial ceremony marking 1 year since the Jonah and Miriam Foundation was established. There were no banners, no speeches, just a small circle of people, the children, a few teachers, a few old villagers, and some who didn't say anything at all. But their eyes contained the things they had wanted to say all their lives. In the middle of the circle, Elia stepped out. In her hand, she held a white chrysanthemum, fresh, just picked from the flower bush grown around the well since last season. She knelt down, placing the flower right next to the foot of the stele, then stood up, not in a hurry, not looking at anyone, just looking at the stone surface, as if looking into the face that she had heard, had drawn, had protected with her own silence. Amelia stood a few steps away, not interfering, not leading. She let her daughter step alone, like a person seeing off rather than a person carrying the burden anymore. She took a deep breath, then spoke. Not loud, not firm, but just enough to reach the ears of those who were still listening. "Thank you for letting us see. Thank you for talking to us through a child that everyone thought didn't know how to speak. And thank you for not being angry with us, those who came too late." Her voice trembled at the end, but she didn't collapse. Instead, Amelia opened her hand and let the embroidered cloth with the letter J fall from her palm. The wind suddenly picked up, lightly, like a long sigh of the old forest. The cloth flew up, swirling in the air like a small white butterfly, then flew away, higher, out of sight, disappearing into the slightly sunny sky. No one ran after it. No one needed to hold it back anymore. A boy in the group of children stepped out. He was holding a small wooden board on which was written the line that Elia had taught everyone to read together. He placed the board against the stele, then turned around, taking a breath. A brown-haired girl stood beside him, speaking first, her voice small but clear. "Your name is..." The other children continued, word by word. "Jonah Holloway. We call you by your right name." Each child with a different tone, a different pronunciation, some stuttering, some misreading, but no one corrected anyone. Because correctness isn't in pronunciation, but in the meaning of the action. To be called by name is to be acknowledged, is to stay, is to depart in freedom. Elia sat down near the tree by the well. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, just smiled slightly, like another breeze had just touched her cheek. She tilted her head, whispering softly, "She's carrying him away. Nobody can lock him anymore." A woman quietly behind the rows of seats took off her hat, revealing her snow-white hair. It was Jeanette. She wiped her eyes, not letting anyone see. Because in Elia's voice today, she heard Miriam's voice, gentle, steadfast, and no longer in pain. The memorial ended not with drums, not with speeches, but with silence. A new silence, no longer heavy, no longer a gag, but acceptance, serenity, like a final word that had been heard. And from there was nothing more to say. Amelia and Elia returned together, walking along the old road that once led them to the villa, with so much unknown. Today, that same road saw them off, but unlike before, not carrying ghosts, but carrying names that had been illuminated. Before stepping out of the forest, Elia turned her head one last time, looking at the well, looking at the tombstone, then said softly, just loud enough for herself to hear, "Thank you for waiting for me to come." The story of Elia, Jonah, and Miriam, as Amelia once whispered by the tombstone, is not a story about ghosts, but a reminder that pain only truly leaves when someone is brave enough to listen to it to the very end. And if you, the person who has patiently gone all the way down this road, have ever felt invisible in a noisy world, have ever not been called by the right name, or have ever been silent because you thought that nobody wanted to hear you speak, please believe that just one person listening can save a soul thought to have been lost. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you carry a gentle belief that sometimes the greatest thing doesn't come from a scream, but from a whisper sincere enough, and a name called with all the love.